Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Vajza Gra. I'm your host Dita. I haven't sat down and recorded an episode in a very long time, and since the last time I sat down and recorded an episode, my life has changed so much. I have changed so much, and most importantly, my relationship with my Albanian culture has shifted a lot. I started this podcast because I yearned so much for answers and connections. As being a girl in the diaspora, I felt a lot of confusion my whole life, the identity issues, yada, yada, yada. And so since then, I've had a lot of opportunities kind of fall in my lap that I think were very much destined, but have led me onto this journey of reconnecting with my culture and growing so much as an individual. And when I first started this podcast, I think I was especially very angry. I think that my lack of understanding about my culture and why people had certain values and why, people acted certain ways that didn't align with what I thought or how I was living. I had a really hard time accepting other people's perceptions and I guess their choice of living. That sort of diminished the more that I understood why people are the way they are and why they think that way and why cultures are a certain way and how they're created. And for those of you who don't follow me on social media, a huge part of this was being able to go back to Kosova and Albania and stand in the soil of my ancestors and learn about the history and just be more in tune with a place that was so far away in my mind. I had only been to Kosova and Albania 2 times before these last couple of times, and my perception of Kosova and Albania was like this place that you went to out of obligation to go see your family. And it wasn't something that was so accessible or so frequent because of obviously economical issues. I'm not in a certain tax bracket where I'm able to travel to Kosova and Albania very often. And I think that a lot of people living abroad can relate to what I'm saying. So this place that was so far away and these people that were so far away and the history that seemed so far away were indirectly impacting my life, and I just didn't know why. And so being able to go there to these places that seemed so far away and be able to connect with it and in turn connect more with myself really shifted my perception of it. And I'm not gonna lie, when I first when I felt the shift of anger turn more into understanding and appreciation and acceptance of my Albanian culture, I kind of felt like a traitor because I was so angry and I was so dogmatic and a little bit, I don't know, hard-headed, I guess. And I struggled with that. I struggled with having one perception or one feeling and then learning and given new information and experience and then having that perception change into something that's more positive, I would say now. This sort of transitional way of thinking or this duality became more of a theme in my life. So I think that because I was more connected and less angry with my culture, I didn't feel totally connected to what the initial mission of this podcast was, given I'm still connected to helping Albanian girls and women, but in a different way. I still feel angry, obviously. I'm not saying that I have this sort of rose-colored lens into the Albanian culture and Albanian people, but I do think that when you understand something, it's really hard to hate it. There's actually a quote that I love so much that says, you can't understand something and hate it at the same time. And that has also been a central theme in my life as well. As I got more comfortable with the idea of I can like my culture, but I can still accept the way that I felt about it and still understand why I felt a certain way. And I can still be critical. I can still look at something critically and be well, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I can totally see why others would or why it's accepted. Because of that new adapted mentality, I think that moving forward, this podcast is going to reflect more on that or be more aligned with that sort of mentality of two things can be true at the same time. So what exactly have I been doing for the last 3 years since the last time I sat down as an angry Albanian girl in front of a camera on a podcast talking shit, mainly about Albanian men? A lot of things, honestly, and a lot of things that were so destined to happen. And destiny is the only word that I can honestly use to describe the series of events that followed the release of this podcast, honestly. I created this podcast because I wanted to help Albanian girls, and I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it, and my only solution was to just talk and just say things and put things out into the world. And right after I released the podcast, an opportunity landed on my lap. So I get an email from this woman named Sahana, and she basically says like, "Hi, my name is Sahana. There's this organization called Original where we invite like young Albanian people from the diaspora to Kosova in Albania for 2 weeks, and you get to travel. Like it's free, basically. The only thing I had to pay for was my flight there. Everything included travel, food, hotels. You just have to show up and, foster connections with the other participants that are going to be there and learn about your history." And I looked at the email and I was like, this can't be real. And there wasn't a lot of things online about it. Like I looked at their website, I looked through their social media. I was like, is this like a real thing? Like this sounds too good to be true. I thought this was going to be like the plot of another Liam Neeson movie. I didn't understand fully what was going on, but I knew, like, I had this intuitive feeling that I had to go and I had to do it. And I was at a point in my life where I was honestly just saying F it. Like I asked for connection. I asked for answers. I didn't know that I was going on this type of journey until later on, where I kind of like look back and I was like, oh, that's why things happen, is because I put myself in a position for them to happen, basically. And so I said yes, and I traveled that summer that I released the podcast in August to Kosova in Albania. And it was the most like transformative trip of my life. I got to understand my culture in a way that when you only go to visit to see family, you can't understand. I was traveling by bus and sleeping from hotel to hotel, from city to city, with 30 other strangers who were also Albanian from all over the world, learning about my culture. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about my culture, but I also learned a lot about myself. And that was the biggest takeaway that I had from this trip, because I had so much confusion and so many identity issues. And I was like, who the fuck am I? Where am I going in life? I remember after this trip, I had that answer, and a huge part of me wanted to go back. Actually, all of me wanted to go back. And so I had this plan in the back of my head. I was like, I want to go live in Kosovo. I don't know if it's for a year. I don't know if I want to settle down there, but because I visited these cities and, had my own adventures in these cities, and I'm more familiar with the streets, I'm more familiar with places, and I know people now. I made friends in these cities. How am I able to accomplish this? And I didn't have an answer yet, but I was constantly brainstorming. And so when I got back from this trip, I got invited to be a speaker at a rally. And I spoke at this rally because of an unfortunate event that happened actually while I was in Europe, of this young girl who was raped brutally for several hours by several men. And so I was really lucky because I had this like newfound love for my culture. I got to sort of have an outlet to help when I got back to New York. So I was like, yes, of course I'll speak at this rally. Like, of course I want to be more hands-on with helping Albanian girls, because it was different, like sitting behind the screen and talking into a microphone and putting it out on the internet versus like speaking at a rally and meeting girls from New York City, meeting Albanian girls from New York City who felt the same way about this horrific event. And just being able to be a voice like in person was really powerful. And this was also the first time that I met Dielza. And this is why everything is so tied together. So that happened. And like I said, I was still trying to brainstorm ways in which I would be able to live in Kosovo, because I was like, I want to go back. Like, I need to go back. I was becoming like, I was discovering myself so much that I was like addicted to that self-discovery. And I was like, who is Dita in Pristina? Like, who is Dita in Kosovo? There were things that happened in my life that prohibited me from executing this plan, which I'm not going to get into on this episode, but definitely in another episode, because I think it ties into another theme that Albanian girls go through, but that's for another day. And so life goes on, and I still have this, like, these magical memories in Kosovo, and I still have this like yearning to be more hands-on and more involved in my community. So then Dielza, who invited me to be a speaker at the rally, messages me, and she was like, would you be interested in sort of conceptualizing a way to be even more hands-on and helping Albanian girls? And I said yes. And at first, we didn't really know how we were going to be hands-on advocates, but we all had this desire to do so. So it was a bunch of like Zoom calls, like weekly Zoom calls, where we're kind of just getting to know each other, understanding like what we're passionate about and how we can each contribute to helping Albanian girls, like hands on. So we ended up going from brainstorming ideas to conceptualizing this idea of going to Kosovo every year for an educational summit where we invite young Albanian girls to meet with one another and to learn from us and from professionals, things that they're not taught in school or at home, things that us in the diaspora looking from the outside feel like would be beneficial for them. And I'm not saying, oh, they have to learn these things. No, it's just things that we felt like would contribute to their life a lot. Thus became the organization that I co-founded with these brilliant women, and it's called Foda. And what Foda is basically a play on the word Oda. If you're Albanian, you probably know this word, but an Oda is a space in a home, and it usually has like cushions on the floor where men would enter the room and sit down and talk amongst each other about family matters, about politics, and kind of have this authoritative voice where they were able to communicate with one another, make decisions, and so on. And obviously, women were not allowed in these spaces. These were purely just for men. And so we thought it would be creative to have a play on this word, basically. And that's where we came up with the name Foda, so feminist Oda, where instead of it being a room full of men making decisions and learning from one another, it would be girls. And so the first ever educational summit was in 2023. So I actually, unfortunately, was unable to be physically present in Kosovo during the first educational summit, but it was definitely a success, and I'm very proud of what our Zoom meetings it became. But fortunately, I was able to go to the one this previous year in 2024. Now, I still was not living in Kosovo. I still didn't have a plan of how I was going to live in Kosovo. So I thought about it, and I was like, if I'm going to go to Kosovo for the organization for the Foda event, why don't I just really stay in Kosovo? So I ended up booking a Airbnb for 5 weeks, which is not necessarily living in Kosovo, but for me, it felt like I was living in Kosovo for those 5 weeks. So I had a community, I had friends, I had my own apartment, and I had a purpose to be in Kosovo. And for those 5 weeks, it was sort of a glimpse of what my life would look like if I was living there full time. Although I wasn't actually living there, my initial desire that I had planted in my head the previous years was sort of slowly manifesting. After that, after those 5 weeks, I came back to New York City, back to regular life, which was so mundane compared to my life in Kosovo. And still, this desire to go back was there. Fast forward to today, or this year rather, because we're in February right now, I had another opportunity presented to me, planted in my lap, basically, of being a photographer for a political candidate in Kosovo. So I spent the first month of the year in Kosovo running around behind this political candidate, taking photos of him and following him on the campaign trail, which has been the most rewarding experience of my life, but definitely the most challenging experience that I've had in a while. I don't know anything about politics, and I especially don't know anything about politics in Kosovo. And seeing this in real life was very eye-opening. And also living in Kosovo for a whole month during the winter season was also very eye-opening. I think I got to see like a different side of Kosovo that I didn't see when I was going on these trips during the summer, which is great because all of these things are me gaining experience, right? And so what I learned about Kosovo in the winter is it's very, very brutal. The fog is brutal. The air quality is really, really bad. And it's very cold and gloomy, as it is everywhere else in the world. But like I said, I got to see like a different side of Kosovo that I didn't experience before. So this is another thing I have to take into account is like the winters there. I was supposed to be there for 3 months, but my plans kind of got derailed. So now I'm in Switzerland. I just keep thinking about this theme of two things can be true at the same time. I can be very grateful that my desire to live abroad or to specifically live in Kosovo came true, but I can also acknowledge how hard it's been and the challenges that I've been facing constantly for the past 2 months. And a lot of it has to do internally. Being on the campaign trail and following a politician to all of the meetings, all of the obligations, all of the events, and being there to do a job and being challenged in that regard as well, because I'm not a professional photographer and I took this opportunity out on a whim and I just said okay to it. And every day was like a new challenge for me, which was great. But at the same time, it was a challenge. What I'm trying to say is, sorry if this podcast episode is all over the place. This is my first time really speaking about this out loud, and doing it in front of a ring light and camera and all this equipment is also adding to my nerves. But being in a transitional period is very, very hard, and it's very messy. Things are constantly uncertain. Things are constantly in the air. There's no structure. Something I'm having a hard time is just accepting like what's going on around me. Naturally, I tend to compartmentalize my feelings. Like I need to understand why I'm feeling a certain way and completely analyze every little thing that I'm feeling and what I'm going to do about it, and put these feelings into a box. Okay, today I'm sad. Today I'm happy. I feel this way about this thing. I feel this way about that thing. It makes sense that I do this because like compartmentalizing my feelings, like putting things in a box or like branding myself. It's because I've done this my whole life, like being a first generation Albanian American, and I think that throughout this podcast, I would love to sort of hold myself accountable in thinking that way and changing it to embrace the duality. And so it kind of also fits into like the new theme of this podcast. It's just embracing the mess and still getting through it, embracing all of the feelings that I have about being an Albanian girl and embracing it and just accepting it, maybe changing it. Who fucking knows, right? And I think that that's the power in that quote of like two things can be true at the same time. It's something that I didn't embrace being an Albanian American. I was like, okay, I can either love my culture or I can hate it. I think it's fair to say that my brand is that I don't know exactly what I'm doing. And that's okay. I can not know what I'm doing, but still be confident. I can not know what I'm doing and still have dreams and a vision, I guess. I have no fucking idea. I plan to use this podcast as, I don't know, I guess a memento of all the things that I'm experiencing and just a really candid narrative to share with the internet and other Albanian girls and women who might be going through the same thing that I'm going, or might go through it one day, or can just relate, even if they don't relate to exactly what I'm going through, at least have something in the podcast that resonates with them. Again, I'm so sorry if this was all over the place. I don't even know if this is like entertaining or not. I really don't fucking know. Honestly, all I know is that life is messy, but I'm trying to make the most of it, and I'm going to share it because I feel like maybe it'll help somebody out there, especially Albanian girls and women. And so that's why I'm here. So that concludes this episode. If you guys enjoy this episode, please give it a like. If you're on YouTube, if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe, obviously. give it a 5-star review if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and please leave a review. You can follow this podcast on Instagram on Vajza Gra, and if you would like to get personal, shoot me a DM, shoot me a DM, or you can email at vajzaangra@gmail.com. I'll also put that in the show notes and in the description on YouTube. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Dita Dreai. I'll also link that below. So yeah, thank you for tuning in to this very messy episode. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope you benefited from it, learned something. I don't know, but I'll see you on the next one. Bye.